Her former boss spilled coffee on her. The whole office went silent when the new person walked in. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, it is free, and it is the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories like this one. Your support truly means the world to us. Where are you watching from today? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to the main character. The smell of burnt coffee still hung in the air when it happened. 1 second, she was standing by the copier, clutching a thin folder to her chest, rehearsing a quiet apology she should not have needed to make. The next, her former boss bumped into her shoulder, his voice sharp and impatient, and the paper cup tipped. Hot coffee spilled down the front of her blouse. It soaked through the fabric, dark and unmistakable, sliding toward her waist as the cup hit the floor and rolled. A few drops splashed onto her shoes. The heat stung, but the embarrassment burned worse. I told you to watch where you are going, he snapped, loud enough for half the floor to hear. She froze. Her hands hovered uselessly in the air. She did not raise her voice. She did not argue. She only whispered that she was sorry, even though she knew she had done nothing wrong. Around them, keyboards stopped clicking. Chairs stopped creaking. Conversations died mid-sentence. The office went quiet. She felt every eye on her, measuring her, judging her. Some with pity, some with satisfaction. This was the man who had once signed her performance reviews. The man who had let her go with a tight smile and a comment about how she was not quite the right fit. End quote. He did not offer a napkin. He did not apologize. He simply straightened his tie, glanced at the stain on her blouse, and scoffed. "Clean yourself up," he said, as if dismissing a problem he no longer cared to see. She bent down to pick up the fallen papers, her fingers trembling as coffee dripped onto the carpet. Her face burned. Her heart pounded so loudly she was sure everyone could hear it. And then, the elevator chimed. The sound cut through the silence like a blade. The doors at the far end of the floor slid open, slow and deliberate. Footsteps followed. Calm, unhurried, confident. No one spoke. One by one, heads turned toward the entrance. A man stepped out of the elevator, tall, composed, dressed in a tailored suit that did not shout for attention but commanded it anyway. His expression was unreadable, his gaze steady as it swept across the room, taking in every detail. The former boss stiffened. The air shifted, something in the room changed, subtle but immediate, like a current snapping into place. People straightened in their chairs. Someone quietly pushed their coffee mug aside. Another closed a browser window in a hurry. She was still crouched on the floor, clutching her papers, unaware of who had arrived or why the silence had deepened. All she knew was that the room felt suddenly heavier, as if everyone was holding their breath. The man's eyes stopped on her. Just for a moment, long enough for her to feel it. She looked up, confused, coffee dripping from her sleeve, her cheeks flushed with humiliation, and met the gaze of a stranger she had never seen before. She had no idea that this was the moment everything began to change. She did not remember how she finished picking up the papers. She only remembered the weight in her chest as she walked to the restroom, the door closing softly behind her, shutting out the office that had pretended not to see her for months, and suddenly saw her all at once. She locked the stall and leaned her forehead against the cool metal divider. The stain on her blouse had already begun to dry at the edges, leaving a brown shadow she knew would not fully come out. She pressed paper towels against the fabric anyway, dabbing carefully, as if gentleness might undo the moment. It did not. A few minutes later, she stood at the sink, washing her hands far longer than necessary. Her reflection stared back at her under harsh fluorescent lights. Tired eyes. A tight jaw. A woman trying very hard not to cry at work. This was not how her day was supposed to go. She had arrived early that morning, like she always did. Riding the bus before sunrise, coffee untouched in her travel mug because she preferred to save it for later. She had rehearsed answers in her head during the commute, reminding herself that this was a temporary assignment. A short contract. A chance to prove she still belonged in an office like this. After everything that had happened, 6 months ago, she had cleared out her desk in silence, sliding personal items into a cardboard box while her former boss stood nearby, arms crossed, already looking past her. No warning, no second chance, just a polite explanation about restructuring and a signature at the bottom of a page. Since then, life had narrowed. Smaller apartment, older clothes, fewer options. She took whatever work she could find. Freelance tasks, short contracts, positions with no guarantees and no benefits. Jobs where people rarely learned her name before deciding whether she mattered. This role was supposed to be different, a fresh start, new management. A building she had never stepped into before today. She had told herself that this was a clean line between who she had been and who she could still become. Now, standing in the restroom with a stained blouse and shaking hands, that line felt painfully thin. She dried her hands, squared her shoulders, and returned to her desk. The office had resumed its low hum, but something remained unsettled, like a conversation paused mid-sentence. No one mentioned the spill. No one asked if she was all right. She opened her email and focused on the screen, forcing herself back into the rhythm of work. At lunchtime, she ate alone at her desk. A simple sandwich wrapped in wax paper brought from home. She scrolled through her phone, checking her bank balance without meaning to, then quickly locked the screen. She did not need that reminder today. By the time the afternoon ended, exhaustion sat heavy in her bones. She packed her bag slowly, waiting for the floor to thin out before heading toward the elevators. As she stepped inside, she caught her reflection again in the mirrored wall. The stain was still visible, faint but there. She sighed and pressed the button for the lobby. Outside, the city air felt cooler, sharper. She adjusted the strap of her bag and began the walk toward the bus stop, passing glass storefronts that reflected her back at herself over and over again. She told herself to forget the man from the elevator, to forget the way the office had gone silent, to forget the strange feeling that something had shifted. It was just another bad day, she insisted. She had no way of knowing that this was only the beginning. That night, her apartment was quiet in the way only small places could be. The kind of quiet where every sound felt louder than it should. She set her bag down by the door, kicked off her shoes, and stood still for a moment, listening to the faint hum of traffic outside. The apartment was modest, one bedroom, thin walls, furniture collected over time instead of chosen. But it was hers. She changed out of the stained blouse and folded it carefully, even though part of her knew she might never wear it again. Old habits were hard to break. In the kitchen, she poured herself a glass of water and leaned against the counter, finally letting the day settle. The silence pressed in, bringing with it everything she had pushed aside since morning. The office, the coffee, the elevator, and the man. She shook her head, as if the motion alone could clear the image from her mind. He was nobody, she told herself. Just another executive passing through, another face in a world that had never made space for her. She carried the glass into the living room and sat on the couch. From the small shelf beside it, she pulled out a worn sketchbook. The cover was soft from use. The edges rounded, the pages inside filled unevenly. Some crowded with drawings, others left blank for weeks at a time. This was the part of her life no one at the office ever saw. She flipped to a clean page and picked up a pencil. For a few seconds, she did nothing, letting the graphite rest between her fingers. Then, almost without thinking, she began to draw. Lines formed slowly, a city street, tall windows, reflections layered over reflections, a woman standing still while the world moved around her. She paused, studied the page, then added another figure in the background. A man this time. Indistinct. More suggestion than detail. Watching without intruding, she frowned slightly and erased part of it, then drew it again. Drawing had always been like this for her. Not an escape, exactly. More like a place where the noise softened enough for her to hear herself think. When she was younger, she had imagined doing this for a living. Illustrations. Design work. Something creative that felt honest. Somewhere along the way, practicality had taken over, and the sketchbook became something she carried quietly, like a secret she was not sure she deserved anymore. She closed it and rested it on her lap. Tomorrow would be another day. Another commute, another attempt to blend in and keep her head down. She checked her phone. A message from her mother blinked on the screen, asking if work was going well. She typed a reply, then deleted it. Typed again. Settled on a simple answer that did not invite concern. Fine, just busy. She set the phone aside and stood, moving toward the window. Outside, the city lights stretched in uneven lines, bright and indifferent. Somewhere in one of those buildings was the office she had left behind hours ago. She did not know why the image of that elevator kept returning to her. It meant nothing, she told herself. She placed the sketchbook back on the shelf, turned off the lamp, and headed to bed. Unaware that the quiet thing she clung to in the evenings, the part of herself she kept hidden, was the very thing that would matter most later on. The next time she saw him, it was not in an elevator. It was 3 days later, on a gray morning that smelled faintly of rain. She had stopped at a small coffee shop 2 blocks from her apartment, the kind of place with mismatched chairs and a chalkboard menu written by hand. It was cheaper than the chains near the office and quieter, which mattered more to her than convenience. She stood near the counter, counting bills in her palm before placing her order. 1 coffee, black, no extras. While she waited, she flipped open her sketchbook, intending to fill the few minutes with something familiar. She barely noticed when someone stepped into line beside her. "Excuse me," a voice said, calm and low. "Is this place usually this busy? Is this place usually this busy?" She glanced up, ready with a polite smile, and froze. It was him. Not in a suit this time, no polished shoes, no elevator behind him. He wore a dark jacket, simple jeans, and a neutral expression that suggested he expected nothing special from the morning. For half a second, neither of them spoke. She broke eye contact first, her pulse quickening for reasons she did not fully understand. "Sometimes," she said. "Mornings are worse." He nodded, as if filing the information away. "Good to know." The barista called her name. She stepped forward, paid, and moved aside to wait for her cup, telling herself that this was coincidence. Cities were full of coincidences. That was all this was. He ordered after her. The same coffee, black. She noticed before she meant to. When her drink was ready, she took it and turned, only to realize there was nowhere obvious to go. Every small table was occupied. She hesitated, then moved toward the narrow counter by the window. A moment later, he joined her, setting his cup down at the opposite end. "I hope you do not mind," he said. There was no space. "That is fine," she replied, adjusting her bag at her feet. They stood in silence for a few seconds, the sounds of steaming milk and low conversation filling the gaps. "I wanted to say something," he said finally. She tensed slightly. "About the other day," he continued. "At the office." He was a lugdes. She looked at him then, really looked at him. There was no apology rehearsed into his expression, no defensiveness, just something thoughtful, restrained. "It was not handled well," he said. "I am sorry you were put in that position. It's about look." She did not know what to say to that. She was not used to strangers acknowledging things that were easier to ignore. "It is not your fault," she said after a moment. "You did not do anything." He studied her for a beat. "That does not mean it should have happened." Something in his tone made her chest tighten. Not pity. Not obligation. Recognition. "I am Daniel," he said, offering a small, careful smile. She hesitated, then nodded. "I am glad to meet you." Ace R. They sipped their coffee in companionable quiet, the earlier tension easing into something unexpectedly comfortable. "I do not usually come here," he said, "but I think I might start." She almost smiled. When they parted a few minutes later, stepping back into the damp street, she told herself again that it meant nothing. And yet, as she walked away, she felt lighter than she had in days, unaware that this ordinary meeting was the beginning of something neither of them had planned. Over the next few weeks, their meetings became quietly consistent. Not planned. Not announced. Just familiar. Some mornings, they crossed paths at the same coffee shop. Other days, they did not. When they did, they talked about ordinary things. Weather, commutes, books they half remembered finishing. He never asked intrusive questions. She never volunteered more than she was ready to give. And somehow, that made it easier. One evening, they ran into each other again, as she was leaving the office late. The sky had already darkened, the glass buildings reflecting city lights like scattered stars. "You look exhausted," he said gently, falling into step beside her. She exhaled. "I am." They walked together for a block, then two, the rhythm of their footsteps aligning without effort. "Do you ever stop working?" she asked. He smiled, but it did not quite reach his eyes. "Not as often as I should. Thanks for watching." They reached a small park tucked between buildings. She slowed, surprised by her own impulse. "I usually sit here for a few minutes before going home," she said. "It helps me reset." He gestured toward an empty bench. "May I?" She nodded. They sat in silence, watching a dog chase a fallen leaf, its owner laughing softly nearby. "I did not think I would like this city," he said after a while. "But there are places like this that make it feel manageable." She glanced at him. "I come here to remember that I exist outside of work." He turned slightly, studying her profile. "That matters." The words stayed with her. Another night, she invited him up for tea after a long rainstorm soaked them both on the walk from the bus stop. Her apartment embarrassed her at first, but he never commented on the size or the worn furniture. Instead, he noticed the sketchbook on the shelf. "You draw?" he asked. She hesitated, then nodded. "When I can, and of a. And 4 cent, do our 4 cent. May I see?" She handed it to him carefully, as if passing over something fragile. He flipped through the pages slowly, taking his time. Cityscapes. Faces without names. Moments frozen mid-feeling. "These are honest," he said. "They feel lived in." Her throat tightened. Praise usually made her uncomfortable, but this felt different. Thoughtful, considered. She watched him then, the way he handled the book gently, as if he understood its weight. He closed it and returned it to her. "You should not stop," she laughed softly. "Life keeps trying." "So do you," he replied. They shared dinners that were simple and unremarkable, meals eaten on opposite sides of a small table, conversations stretching longer each time. She learned that he preferred walking to driving, that he listened more than he spoke, that he carried a quiet seriousness he rarely explained. He learned that she kept lists she never finished, that she hated asking for help, that she had learned to make herself small to survive. Sometimes, she caught him watching her when he thought she was not looking, as if memorizing details. Sometimes, she wondered what he was not saying. She did not know that he was already struggling with the truth. That every moment with her made the secret heavier. That he feared the exact thing he was beginning to want. For now, they existed in the fragile space before answers, unaware that this growing connection would soon be tested in ways neither of them expected. The invitation arrived on a Friday afternoon. It was printed on thick cream paper, slipped into an envelope with her name written neatly across the front. She found it waiting on her desk when she returned from lunch, placed there with quiet intention, a company event, an annual gala to welcome new leadership and partners. Attendance encouraged. She frowned slightly as she read it. Events like this were not usually meant for people in short-term roles. She turned the card over once, then again, as if it might explain itself. That evening, Daniel mentioned it as they walked together toward the bus stop. "You received an invitation," he said, carefully casual. "I did," she replied. "I am surprised." "So was I," he said, after a pause. She glanced at him. "Are you going?" "Yes, I think." Something in his tone made her look at him more closely, but he was watching the street ahead, expression composed. The night of the gala arrived sooner than she expected. She stood in her apartment, adjusting the simple black dress she rarely wore. It fit well enough, though it was older, chosen more for restraint than impact. She pulled her hair back, studied her reflection, and reminded herself that she was there to blend in, not to be seen. The venue was downtown, all glass and light. As she stepped inside, the space opened around her, filled with low music and the hum of conversation. Men in tailored suits, women in polished dresses, laughter that sounded practiced. She felt out of place immediately. She spotted a few colleagues and offered polite smiles, accepting a glass of water instead of champagne. She lingered near the edge of the room, waiting for the moment she could leave without seeming rude. Then the lights shifted. A soft chime echoed through the hall, and conversations quieted. People turned toward the stage, glasses lowered, bodies angling forward in anticipation. A voice came over the speakers, confident and warm. "Thank you all for being here tonight. We are excited to introduce the person who will be guiding the next chapter of our company." She barely listened at first, distracted by the movement around her. "And now," the voice continued, "please welcome our new Chief Executive Officer." As this riss, applause filled the room. She clapped automatically, eyes lifting toward the stage, and froze. Daniel stepped into the light. The same Daniel who drank black coffee beside her, who sat on a park bench and listened, who held her sketchbook like it mattered. The room erupted with approval, but all she heard was the rush of blood in her ears. He stood tall, composed, every inch the man the room expected him to be. He smiled, nodded, accepted the attention with ease born of familiarity. She felt suddenly small. Fragments of memory collided. The elevator, the silence, the way the office had shifted the moment he arrived. It made sense now. Around her, people leaned closer to one another, whispering his name with admiration. Someone nearby glanced at her, then back at him, curiosity flickering briefly before fading. He began to speak, thanking the board, acknowledging the team, outlining a vision that sounded sincere and deliberate. She did not hear most of it. Her chest tightened, disappointment and disbelief tangling together. Every quiet moment they had shared replayed in her mind, reframed by this new truth. He had known. She took a step back, then another, until the crowd swallowed her presence. As the applause rose again, she turned and walked toward the exit, her heart pounding with the realization that the connection she had trusted was built on a silence she had never agreed to. She did not see him scanning the room for her, but he felt it the moment she was gone. She did not go home right away. The night air outside the venue felt colder than it should have, sharp against her skin as she walked without direction, heels clicking too loudly on the pavement. The city moved on around her, unaware that something fragile had just broken. She stopped beneath a streetlight and finally let herself breathe. Not cry. Not yet. Her phone buzzed in her bag. She did not need to look to know who it was. She kept walking, jaw tight, replaying every moment with him now colored by what she knew. The coffee shop, the park bench, her apartment, all of it real. And yet not. By the time she reached her building, she felt hollowed out. She climbed the stairs slowly, unlocked her door, and stood in the dark for a long moment before turning on the lamp. The sketchbook sat where she had left it. She picked it up, then set it down again, suddenly unsure whether it felt like comfort or accusation. Another vibration. This time, she answered. "Please," Daniel said before she could speak. His voice was unguarded, urgent in a way she had never heard. "Let me explain." She closed her eyes. "You already did. On that stage." "That is not fair," he said quietly. "Neither was what you did," she replied. Her voice surprised her with its steadiness. "You knew who you were, you knew what that meant. And you let me believe something else." "I did not lie to you," he said. "You did," she said. "You just did it by omission." There was a pause on the line. She imagined him standing somewhere bright and expensive, suit still immaculate, the world bending easily around him. "I wanted to be someone normal with you," he said. "Just Daniel. And I wanted the truth," she said. "I wanted to choose." Silence stretched between them, heavy with everything unsaid. "I never meant to hurt you," he said at last. "I believe that," she replied, "but belief does not erase impact." Deeper. She hung up before he could respond. The next morning, she woke early and went to work as usual. The office felt different now. Familiar faces looked at her longer than before. Whispers followed her through the hallway, careful but curious. She focused on her tasks, kept her head down, answered questions with professionalism that bordered on distance. At noon, an email appeared in her inbox. A meeting request from Daniel. She stared at the screen for a long time before declining. Later that afternoon, her contract manager pulled her aside, apologetic and tense. "They are restructuring some of the temporary roles," he said. "Nothing personal." She nodded, even as something inside her went still. By the end of the day, she packed her desk again. Another box, another quiet exit. As she stepped outside, she did not feel defeated, just tired. She had learned something important, even if it hurt. That dignity mattered more than proximity to power. That she could walk away, even when it would have been easier to stay. Across the city, Daniel stood alone in his office, staring out at the lights, knowing that the distance between them was no longer measured in floors or titles, but in trust he had broken and did not yet know how to earn back. Daniel did not sleep that night, nor the nights that followed. He returned to work before sunrise, stayed long after the building emptied, and filled the hours with meetings that no longer felt urgent. Numbers blurred, presentations passed unheard. The quiet moments were worse. They left room for memory. He replayed the way she had looked at him in the coffee shop, guarded but open. The care with which she had handed him her sketchbook. The calm in her voice when she said she wanted the truth. He had failed her there. Apologies, he knew, would not be enough. Words had been his shield. They were not what she needed now. So he started with action. He asked for her contract file. Not to reinstate it. Not yet. He read it carefully, noting every condition she had accepted without leverage. He asked questions about the dismissal process. He reviewed the behavior report tied to her former boss, the one that had been quietly buried months earlier. This time, it did not stay buried. An internal review followed, then another. Witness statements were taken. Policies were re-examined. The result was not dramatic, but it was clear. Accountability replaced silence. The man who had spilled coffee and dignity alike was no longer protected by proximity to power. Still, Daniel did not reach out. Instead, he turned his attention to something smaller, something personal. He remembered the sketchbook. He contacted a local gallery that supported emerging artists. He did not attach his name. He did not offer sponsorship. He asked questions. What it took. How submissions worked. What kind of support mattered most to people who created quietly. Then he waited. Weeks passed. She had begun to settle into a new rhythm. Temporary work again. Evenings alone. Drawing when she could, not because it would lead anywhere, but because it steadied her. One afternoon, an email arrived from an unfamiliar address. An invitation. A small community exhibition. Limited space. Local talent. Her name listed among the featured artists. She reread it 3 times, certain it was a mistake. At the bottom, a note. Your work was submitted anonymously. We hope you will join us. The opening night was modest. Soft lighting, folding chairs. Walls filled with pieces that spoke quietly but clearly. She stood near her work, heart racing, unsure whether to stay. Then she saw him, not on a stage, not surrounded by deference. He stood near the entrance, hands clasped loosely, waiting. When their eyes met, he did not move closer right away. He gave her space. The choice she had asked for before. I did not submit your work without permission, he said when she approached. The gallery reached out after seeing it. I only made the introduction. She searched his face. There was no defense there, no expectation. I did not come to explain myself, he continued. I came to listen if you are willing, and if not, I will leave. She looked around the room, at her drawings on the wall, at people pausing to really see them. This is not an apology, she said carefully. No, he agreed. It is accountability. Something in her chest eased. For the first time since the gala, she felt seen on her own terms. And that changed everything. The night of the exhibition was a quiet one, but it marked the start of something neither of them had expected. She did not know what she had been waiting for, but as the evening stretched on, she found herself speaking with him more easily than she ever had before. He listened to her without judgment, without distraction, and for the first time, she realized how much she had needed to feel heard. I wasn't sure I'd be able to show my work like this, she confessed, her voice softer than she intended. I didn't know if it mattered. It matters, he said, his gaze steady. More than you think. Right, boss? They talked for hours, not about work or the past, but about art, about dreams, about what it meant to find a place where you could simply exist. He did not ask for forgiveness. He did not press for explanations. He simply offered space she had not known she needed. When the night wound down and the gallery began to empty, he walked her to the door. Will you consider coming by the office again? He asked, as they stood outside in the cool night air. There is a place for you, if you want it, no expectations, just an opportunity. She looked at him, really looked at him, and felt a quiet shift. The distance between them had been measured in silence, in broken trust, in unspoken apologies. But standing there, she understood that the real change wasn't in the offer he had made, but in the way he had changed his approach, his understanding of her worth, of the things that mattered most. I don't know yet, she replied honestly, her voice calm but certain. But I think I'm getting closer to knowing what I want. He smiled, a small, genuine smile. That's all I could hope for. They stood for a moment longer, neither of them rushing. The city around them continued its pulse, indifferent to the small moments that could change everything. She walked away from him, but this time there was no weight in her steps. The weight had lifted, replaced by something lighter, something freer. She didn't have the answers yet, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was walking toward the right questions. Days passed, and she continued her work. She accepted offers that felt more aligned with her values. She didn't stop drawing, and she didn't stop looking for opportunities. She kept her boundaries, kept her distance. But she also allowed herself to grow something she hadn't allowed herself to do in a long time. Months later, when she received a call from the gallery about a new opportunity to display her work in a larger exhibit, she smiled. She thought of the quiet conversation that had set it all in motion and realized that sometimes growth wasn't in the grand gestures. Sometimes it was in the small choices to trust yourself. As for Daniel, he never stopped working on the things he had promised. It wasn't enough to fix everything overnight, but every step forward mattered. He knew now that real change didn't come from authority, but from empathy. It was a lesson he would carry with him always. And so, life continued, in its messy, imperfect way. But for once, they both had found something they hadn't expected, something lasting, something true.